Like the fact that like I never look for parking. I don't. You know what I mean? It may take me a couple minutes, but like I always park near my destination. It's just little things where I just feel like my folks are taking care of me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You got a whole squad sort of coming together to make sure that them cars move when they need to.
Right. And we all can. You know what I mean? Like this is something that
we can all
we can
avoid looking for parking if you talk to your ghosts. Yep. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another phenomenal episode of My Mama Told Me, the podcast where we dive deep into the pockets of Black conspiracy theories, and we finally work to prove that race relations in this country will never be solved until Wes Anderson exclusively starts making movies starring Clifton Powell. That's right, we need the whitest filmmaker and the blackest star of every BET Plus film to come together and solve what is broken in this country. It's the only way, folks. I'm your host, Langston Kerman, as always, coming at you hot, baby. Coming in spry. I'm feeling good today, baby. I got a nice little, I got some pepper in my step. You know what I mean? I got some oomph, a little chutzpah. You know, I'm excited because my guest today, she's a person who deserves respect. Most of the people I have on this podcast are absolute idiots. They're fools. They're clowns who just say silly things. But she's a person who says very important things and thoughtful things. She's careful with the language that she uses. She's a journalist. She's a cultural critic. And more importantly, she has a podcast called Mom and Dad Are Fighting. It's a parenting podcast. You know her. You love her. Please give it up for my guest, Miss Jamilah Lemieux.
Hi.
Hey, thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Hell yeah, it's going to be fun. This is, you heard it in the intro. We mostly have comedians on, so it's always a beautiful treat when somebody who takes themselves a little more seriously is here to help enlighten us in a way that a bunch of my dumb friends can't.
My career is such a great facade for how not serious I take myself. And certainly none of my friends take me very seriously. Like the fact that I would get that sort of intro in my friend circle is like a what the fuck moment to this day, because I am the joker. I'm the silly one. I'm the fun friend. So So I came.
I'm hugely disappointed now.
You should be, because I came adequately unprepared too. I did no research. I just showed up.
Oh, that's beautiful. This is always my fear whenever a journalist comes on, is that you guys do, my presumption of the work that you do is you're constantly doing research. And so my fear is that my very inadequate research is only going to disappoint you. But now that I know you didn't even do anything, I feel like I'm going to be thriving throughout this episode.
You've got this.
Hell yeah. I'm excited. So you came with a conspiracy theory that I'm super excited about because we don't touch on the paranormal, in my opinion, often enough. It doesn't come up as often as you might think in this podcast. But you said, my mama told me
Black people don't see ghosts.
So to be fair, that's not what I said.
Uh-oh.
I was presented a list of conspiracy theories to consider if I didn't have one of my own.
Yeah.
And all the ones I had were not fun at all. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I don't know that we could really, I guess we could probably have a great conversation about the Popeyes causing sterilization, or Church's Chicken causing sterilization rumor that rocked the 90s. But how much can we say about that? But I thought that this one was really interesting because I'd never heard it before. And so I thought maybe this was something you were familiar with. So I wanted to hear from you about Black people not hearing or not seeing ghosts, because I think I have a counterpoint to that.
Oh, shit.
I might disprove this conspiracy that I was not familiar with until
So
your
wait a
producer told
goddamn
me
minute.
about it.
You're telling me that you selected this just so you could flip it on the head and tell me why I'm stupid? How dare you, ma'am? How dare you?
Isn't that what cultural commentators do for a
I
living?
guess. And I don't care for that at all. No, I write a lot of silly things down, but I do think years ago I used to do this bit about having I lived with a white woman for a few years, and she was a
Sorry to
like
hear that.
an avid believer in like ghosts and the fact that our apartment was haunted. And she used to tell me there was like a ghost in our apartment all the time. And we lived in fucking, where were we living? We were living in Crown Heights at the time on Eastern Parkway. So it's like, nah, you don't get to play ghost games over here when we like are amongst all these Jamaican people. You know what I mean?
Did
Like,
you bring her to Crown Heights?
we went there together. It was
Okay.
a joint decision. I didn't go like, let me bring this white bitch to Crown Heights and see what happens. We were moving from Boston. We both needed a roommate, and we teamed up to make that shit happen.
You came from Boston and thought the safest thing for your Black life that matters was to move to Crown Heights, Brooklyn with a white woman.
No. I thought the cheapest thing for my Black life to matter was to move to Crown Heights with a white woman. I didn't think it was safe the moment we showed up.
I'm glad you realized that you were not, in fact, safe the entire time that you were.
Oh no, I know when a McDonald's is haunted. You know what I mean? Our apartment was fine, but everything else around that community was not doing well. It's, I guess, better now. I don't know.
I mean, I lived in New York probably around the same time. I loved Crown Heights then, but I can just imagine it would have been a difficult place for the two of you all to navigate, or not. I don't know. I feel like they leave white women alone. It probably might have been harder for me to walk around over there with them niggas than for her. They might have just stepped out her way so she didn't call the police.
Right. I feel like, and we were on like Crown Heights. We were on like Eastern Parkway in Troy. So like
I know exactly where you
were moving into sort of like where it becomes that Hasidic side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for a white woman over there, they're like, all right, we can make sense of why you're here.
Right.
Whereas like I look like an outsider no matter what direction I go into. So it was just a bunch of niggas looking at me weird and mean for no reason all day.
No, there's always been, but every Black community has always had their guy in a cardigan. I want to be special so bad. You ain't the first nigga went to college. Okay.
No.
They've seen you before. Even from
they've
Boston.
seen it. That don't mean they like it. Motherfuckers still have opinions, even though they're familiar with it.
Well.
Okay, so that said, she was an avid believer in ghosts. And I think, and I'm curious to hear where you are with this whole thing. I think that ghosts, personally, I do believe that people see what they see. That like, if you believe in ghosts, you probably are going to see ghosts. That said, I do think that there's a weird conflation that white people do sometimes with scary sounds and sort of like odd objects or experiences with what is probably a human experience outside of their just norm, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I'm going to sound super hotep hat. I already know.
Hold on.
So that's how they get you.
But that's how they get you. This is seriously how white people try to get you, for real. But shout out to one of my favorite podcasts, A Little Bit of Juju, and the host Juju Bay, because she articulated this in a way that really kind of helped me to make sense of it. So what are ghosts, right? Those are dead people, right? People that used to be dead. So that's your grandparents. That might be one of your, friend. We're grown friends. You know what I mean? Like people we've known. Were they horrors? Were they monsters? So why do we have this negative idea when we think of ghosts? We think of people or spirits that have been here before, and I get part of it is just popular culture has glamorized, or, there've been a lot of movies and TV shows and books that center around the idea of a haunting or somebody coming back with a bad, intention or not wanting to do something good. And then there's, videos and books and, even when you're a little kid about ghosts coming back to do good things, but it's still kind of like this weird being that's outside of you. It's not aspirational. And in fact, it's usually kind of portrayed as if these spirits are stuck. Like they shouldn't be able to talk to you. They shouldn't be in the house, right?
Even Casper is a boy who wishes he wasn't dead. He's
Right.
nice, but he's like, fuck, I wish I was still kicking it.
Right. And so where in some of the African traditions that we were stolen from, our ancestors communicated with ancestors, right? With people who had gone on to the other side. You saw it depicted in Black Panther, right? On some level. And I guess that's most people's kind of mainstream introduction to that level of ancestral veneration, right? The idea that like I respect and I care for and I talk to my ancestors. So like,
right.
So to me, when I think of ghosts or people that were here, like those are my ancestors. And like I do have a communication with them because I talk to them and I set out food for them. I have an altar set up in my house. I've gone full California woo-woo girl in the past 2 years. But it's like the most powerful thing that I've ever done. And I think it's something that Black people need to tap into and white people need to tap in and other folks who haven't. Find out what your ancestors did and tap into that. I have a lot of white blood in me. I'm curious. At some point, I'm going to figure out like, okay, well, what did my ancestors on that side? What were their spiritual rituals? I hope it wasn't killing Black people. You know what I mean? Like
it probably was.
It might have been, but like, what were the things they did to honor their ancestors and their dead? And like, I think that that's something that we should, as African Americans, we have not been taught that, like in church, you're taught the spirits are bad. In the movies, you're taught they're scary. These are your people. Set out, your grandma's favorite candy bar and a glass of water and a white candle for her.
Whoa.
It doesn't have to be something super involved or crazy. Start small, but start talking to your ghost.
Start talking to your ghost is what you're telling me. But I have so many questions because this is a completely new idea to me, right? I've never once been encouraged to talk to any ghosts. In fact, I think I've always functioned under the presumption that if I do not talk to them, they will not bother me and we can live at peace amongst each other, right? Mm-hmm. So what is this candle meant to do? Like, is this just a way of initiating the conversation? And at the point that I've initiated it, are they coming to me like themselves as they were living? Or is it like some weird dementia version of that person who's going to say some weird, scary shit that I got to process?
So that depends what your level of communication is. And there are people who have powers where they can really communicate beyond what the average person can. Mm-hmm. Right. I am not, to my knowledge, one of those people. And I'm certainly not a guide or a teacher or, I'm still relatively new to, ancestral veneration myself. But as I understand it, when you light a candle and you make an offering of water, food, maybe something that reminds you of them, maybe these are people that and you should have a separate also for your relatives from your friends. You can do something for friends and other people you admire too, but for your family, you want to have a place where it's like, here's Big Mama, here's Granddaddy, like here's my cousin passed away. Like
you don't talk the same shit with your grandma that you talk with your ghost homies.
Exactly.
Is what you're saying.
Exactly. That would be different, and like, you can go to that space. I go twice a day. Some people go a few times a week. Some people go as they feel compelled to do so, and you can talk to them. I kind of talk to them as a group. I just say, I'm thankful that they're a part of my life, that they care for me, that I'm part of this family that I come from, and that I hope they're well and that I hope they accept my offering. It's usually a plate of whatever food. I don't eat breakfast, but I make them breakfast. But like when I eat dinner at night, I set out a plate for food for them. Like if I don't cook dinner, if I go to Popeyes, I get 2 Popeyes chicken sandwiches. I put one out for my, my big homies in the sky. And, in terms of communication, and I won't share everything because it's personal, but like I haven't really openly talked about any of this before. Sometimes it's messages, right? Sometimes like there's something you were trying to seek clarity on, maybe a bit you were working on that just figures itself out. And you're like, oh, this is how I end it. For
Mm.
me, it could be something that I'm writing and, or just material that I'm, something that I've been noodling on, like an essay just kind of starts and spills out of my, brain. And I just got to pull over and put it in my notes app. So it's not that it always happens like when I'm at the altar, you know what I mean? But just these little things that have been unlocked.
I got you. So let me ask you a little bit about this food, because this is I'm dumb, and I'd love to, so you put out some Popeyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen a bite taken out of that bad boy? Is there
No,
any?
nobody's gonna eat the food. Nobody's gonna eat the food. And you don't have to do, some people will do a part, like if they're eating a sandwich, they just cut off piece of the sandwich.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Like if it's a meal, I usually, they'll usually get a smaller portion than what I feed us. But sometimes it's kind of like, I'm going to give you the big piece of chicken. I got a 4-piece and I'm putting the big piece of chicken out. And to me, it's just this kind of like sign of respect and acknowledgement.
Oh, so it sounds similar to like in the Bible when you like cut a goat. Like you chop a goat head off and you go
Mhm.
like, yeah, this goat's for you, God, and then the other goat is for us, and we eat that goat, but this goat,
Yes,
hell yeah.
essentially. Yeah. Like we don't eat this one, you
And
know?
so you can do that with Popeyes. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I do it with, if I have a milkshake or a Starbucks or something, I don't finish it. You know what I mean? Like I say, if I don't pour some out, usually if I have a spirit drink, I usually pour some out, but if I'm out in public, I can't always pour my drink out. So I just leave some.
Okay, I got you. So let me ask you this. Is this a practice that you grew up with in like your childhood home? Or is this something you then, I know you said you've really gotten into it later in life, but like, is that something that you created for yourself, or were you being taught that by your parents, by the people before you, whatever?
No, I didn't get any of this growing up. Interestingly enough, my father practiced a religious tradition that involves some of these kind of rituals, but we were kind of allowed to make our own decision. I didn't live in the house with him, and we were all kind of like allowed to make our own decisions about like how we wanted to engage spirituality. So I explored a few things, but no, this is something I discovered quite recently in the past 2 years.
And what motivated that transition into welcoming spirits in this way? Because like you said, we live in a society that teaches us that ghosts are scary. And so for me, as a person who treats them like some scary motherfuckers, I think I would feel hesitant to start to treat ghosts differently. So was there something in your life beyond, I know you said you listened to that podcast, but like, is there anything that prompted you deciding like, yo, I'm not going to be scared of them anymore. I'm going to welcome them in a different way?
I was never scared of ghosts, like I hadn't thought, like I kind of always thought, to what extent I thought about it, that if people were communicating with me, it was usually in my best interest. You know what I mean? Like I
Mm,
hadn't crossed anybody, so like nobody should be coming back mad at me. You know what I mean? Like
right.
if somebody's on the other side, if they've got, of all the people in the world they have access to, if they're trying to talk to me, they're probably trying to have a back. But like, I can't remember the inciting moment. I just remember that I noticed, and I was living in Brooklyn at the time where I first started really kind of noodling around this stuff. But I noticed that a lot of the women around me were doing these things, women I
Mm,
really admired, and that they would talk about, their ancestors. And they were talking about their ancestors in a way that I wasn't. Because when I talked about my ancestors, I might as well have been talking about like Malcolm X and Harriet Tubman. You know what I mean? Like we would say
right.
ancestors, or, if I was at an event or a dinner where people were pouring libations for their, I was thinking of those people, like I more so than I was my own family. And, it kind of started me doing some, just kind of thinking about how I was disconnected from most of my, the people, when you think of your folks, like your grandparents, like how I was,
Yeah.
most of mine passed away when I was pretty young. So I didn't get to know them, and so we didn't really have a relationship, and how I had some resentment about some things that happened before I was born, and just some stuff I needed to work through. And so it kind of sent me on a journey of thinking about them. And over time, I became aware of altar building and the idea of like trying to actually communicate with them. And so, I picked up some books, listened to some podcasts and some Instagram streams. And, again, like I'm not an expert, but, I would say that like my ancestors are are my religion at this point. This is kind of what my spiritual practice like primarily is. And I feel very good about it. I talk to
Yeah.
them and then I pray. And I've never prayed twice a day in my life. Like I've just never been that consistent spiritually. And this is just, I don't know. I just feel like my life has been going well. Like things have been good. It's a pandemic. Like I'm suffering like everybody else. I've definitely had some tough times the past 2 years, but you know what I mean? Like in general, just like my ability to deal with it has been improved. Like
you hit your own stride in sort of like accepting of, I guess, these new rituals in your life.
For sure.
It's fascinating to me because I think the way you're articulating this, I've never thought of, but I do think that is something really important in sort of taking ancestors as a word from like this generic space of like the people we find in a high school textbook to people that are literally people who were connected to what becomes your day to day, the experiences that are right in front of you. And I would argue there's probably a level of like intentionality, right? That like for Black people especially, we are trained to not see our own people as valuable and just to be like, well, these big hyperbolic extreme names, those are the ones you should look up to. But your grandma ain't shit. And you ain't got to ever think about her as like a valuable human on the planet, whatever.
Right. And it's like Malcolm X is not the reason you're alive.
No,
you know what I
he
mean?
didn't give a fuck.
Like that was not his walk. I didn't say that, but you know what I mean? Like your grandparents met and made a series of decisions that led to one of your parents being here and that led to you being here. And like that alone is something to honor. And like you can have a complicated relationship with these people. For some, I'm fortunate that I don't have abuse or trauma related to any of my ancestors, you know what I mean, that I know of or anything like that. But I know that, there are people who do, you know what I mean? And who have to work through that. And what I've heard about it, and again, I'm not the expert, is that, that people who may have harmed you on this side might be the ones working the hardest to help you out on the other side. Perhaps the grandparent who was very miserly and unkind, becomes the generous, caring, figure on the other side. But the one thing I want to make sure I connected is like the music you played or the little Hotep soundbite thing, that our ancestors who were enslaved, came with these practices and were prohibited from practicing openly, you know what I mean? And so they began to, depending on where they were located, hide their religious practices and their ways of showing reverence to ancestors and staying connected to them in other things. In certain parts of the world, that was Africans hiding their spiritual practices in Catholicism, right? So which is why if you go to certain parts of New York and you see all these, Black Spanish speaking people, with Catholic stuff all around, and they're not Catholic. You know what I mean? It's really, really fascinating. Like we've always figured out ways to do what we've always done. And, from every history of Africa that I've come across, like something we've always done has been talking to our ancestors. So I think it's just a great opportunity that African Americans have that most of us have been scared out of participating in, or just have never heard somebody talk about it like this before.
Yeah. And I think you made a really interesting point that I think helps to sort of ease someone into this experience, or at least considering an experience like this, which is the fact that like your grandparents and you may have a complicated relationship, or your ancestors and you may have a complicated relationship, and that's okay. I think ghosts for the average consumer are sort of treated as like these scary entities because they themselves are just bad people or complicated people, or people that still needed to solve a problem that got left behind. And in a lot of ways, the human experience is that. So there is no good ghost and bad ghosts. It's just complicated individuals who can either lift you up or help you answer questions that maybe you couldn't answer yourself, or help you find free parking wherever that can exist. But one way or the other are there for resolve more than adding conflict, as you're sort of putting it, I think.
Yeah, we just, we don't, and that's not to say that, there aren't spirits that may have bad intentions, but like, that's not our definitive history of engaging with ghosts. Like as a people,
Right.
for us, engaging with ghosts means talking to our dead and speaking to them with respect. Or just think about how Black people do funerals. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
just that there's a level of performance for a lot of them, the ritual of the repast and kind of like who cooks and what they cook, or just the amount of time that we spend together, I think, on those occasions is and how it's spent is on some level, I think, a nod to how we used to funeralize our dead. You know what I mean? I
Mm,
think the thing that what's missing is that for a lot of people, the communication or the conversation stops there. But I've always throughout my life heard people talk about, it may just be posting an Instagram picture and they're writing it to the dead homie. You know what I mean?
right.
Or people talking about, sometimes I feel my mother's presence and I just talk to her. Like I think a lot of people are engaging in their day-to-day life without calling it anything in particular.
Do you think that the hesitancy to call it something in particular, or to directly align it with what you're describing with like an altar and sort of like this active effort to place food in front of the altar towards your ancestors is connected to Black people's relationship with religion in this country? That like, we got a heavy hand of Christianity like
Mm-hmm.
slapped on top of us. Do you think that that is in any way an obstruction to what we're moving towards in your description of ghosts?
Absolutely. And there are people far smarter than me who can really make the connection between what goes down in a lot of our average Black churches and some of our traditional stuff, and how there's a through line. You know what I mean? Like how it's not all brand new and native to America. Some of this is our traditional spiritual practice. It's just showing up with this other religion that we've been, introduced to. But like, yeah, I mean, there's a deep fear of African spirituality and Africans that lives in a whole
Mm,
lot of African American people, and a fear of. I mean, we've been made to feel inferior, and that inferiority complex is not limited to like what we think of African Americans. On some level, it's what we think of who we were before we got here. Like
right.
not thinking of us as industrial. I mean, there are some people that only can think of us as kings and queens before slavery, and then there are people that can't think of us as having a society and having rituals and things that matter, that just kind of thinks of us as these our ancestors as these folks that were just kind of there until they were uprooted, but they don't have any real imagination or curiosity around who they were before. But like also as a means of survival, you know what I mean? Like on the
Right.
plantation, you had to hide these things. And so for some people, the hiding was how do I get creative and figure out a way to stay true to myself? And for others, it was how do I, assimilate into something that, is safer and easier for me to deal with? How do I survive my circumstances?
Which I think connects really nicely back to what you were saying about like this adopting of like Catholic candles for non-Catholic, not services, but experiences. It's
Mm-hmm.
just we are using what is placed in front of us to express ourselves however we can. And it doesn't necessarily matter if this is the right equipment for the job. The job is just getting done however we need it to get done.
That's essentially the story of our lives as Black people, right? Like we don't always have the quote unquote right equipment, but somehow we have to figure out how to get through. And that's what we've done, and a big part of the reason that we've gotten through is our relationship to religion, both our traditional religion and our relationship to Christianity. But it's also in some ways held us back because there are
Yeah.
things that we don't challenge and things that we don't interrogate, or, attitudes that are incredibly detrimental that are funneled through the church that are a lot of our people are susceptible to. It's tricky.
Yeah, white Jesus, he ain't done the best for us, I think. There are
No,
times where,
no.
hey, I love white Jesus, but he's not always the best. There's a bunch of hurt that comes along with at least the representation of him.
For sure. There's the hurt of the representation. There's the way that Black queer people have been made to hide, in the music ministry, right? Hide in the dance ministry, hide, with their little friends and
Hmm.
at gatherings. There's the ways that Black women, a lot of Black women are in these deeply emotional and on some level unhealthy relationships with their pastors, you know what I mean? Who
Yeah.
becomes the man of the household, even though he's not the man of the household, and they're tithing money that they don't have and making sure that he's getting a new Cadillac or his mortgage paid off for his anniversary, but they're struggling to make ends meet. And also, contorting to some ideas about gender that don't really work necessarily for us, but that have been funneled to us through religion.
Yeah. Let me ask you this last question before we go to break. You are a mother, and
I
I'm
am.
curious to know how this newer practice in your life now relates with your daughter. Is this something that you are teaching her as well? Are you at all worried that she's gonna like bring this up at school and then people are gonna be like, "Get your weird ass out of here with the ancestors and the altars and all that"? Is this something you're worried about, or are you like, hell yeah, this is exciting, let's dig in?
You know what? I thought, hell yeah, this is exciting. Let's dig in. And I brought her into it, after not very long. I have told her that the altar is among a number of things that happen in our household that might be different than what other people do in their households. And so our household business is our business. So you don't need to tell anybody everything we
Nice.
eat, what I put out and for who comes through here. Like, I think the tradition of a Black mama's business is her business is
Yeah,
something that I have managed to indoctrinate into her.
that's very smart. You stack tradition on tradition, and it sort of
Yes,
protects the tradition from being damaging for both you and her
exactly.
as she's navigating the world as a young person.
Exactly.
Hell yeah. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back with more Jamilah Lemieux and more My Mama Told Me. And we are back.
Hell no. To the no, no, no. Hell to the no. Hell to the no. To the no, no, no.
Yep. We're back. We're still here with more Jamilah Lemieux. More My Mama Told Me. We're still talking about the possibility that ghosts do in fact exist and that Black people can see them. Again, I was bamboozled with this episode. I was presented this as if Jamilah believed this or at least considered this. And it turns out this was just a character study. This was just her chance to make me feel shame at at presenting this very dumb idea in the first place. Do you feel like, and this is, I guess, maybe a good question to lead us into some of the research that I did. Do you feel like, in relation to this conversation around the ancestral plane, around these ancestors that you're experiencing things with, do you feel like they've ever presented themselves in an actual like physical form? Have you seen one of your ancestors before?
No, I have not.
Are you at all concerned that that might happen and that changes your relationship with them?
It might change the relationship. I'm not concerned about it. That's something I worry over.
Okay. You're like, if it happens, we'll figure it out then.
Figure it
But
out
for
then.
now,
It's just not a thing that's on my mind. It's not like, what if they walk through? I'm like, nobody's gonna bite the sandwich, and just trying to have a
see,
prayers
that
heard.
would be the part that fucks me up is I could not handle somebody biting the sandwich and
Well, I
still.
don't think I can handle that either, but it's not gonna have. I feel confident the sandwich won't be bitten unless my child decides to violate what I've explicitly instructed her, which is that we don't eat the altar food.
Don't you dare eat that sandwich. All right. Well, fair enough. You have much more faith than I do that that people are going to be reasonable about not eating those sandwiches. let's dig into some of this research, because I think some of this might, I don't know what it does anymore, actually, because I think you've spoken so eloquently about some of what you consider to be ghosts, but I'd be curious to hear what you think about what the standard beliefs of ghosts are sort of being communicated as through I guess research and science, if we want to call some of this that. So a study from this company YouGov shows that 41% of Americans believe in ghosts, and only 20% of those people actually claim to have seen a ghost. So almost half of us think ghosts are real. Only about 20% of us actually feel like we've encountered some sort of paranormal spirit.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm not surprised at those numbers. I also think I don't know, we're obviously from something very vast and complicated, right? So the idea that it just ends at death, it's easy to believe otherwise, because what a just fascinating thing that the world is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We don't know what the other side looks like. So I think, why not believe in something else? I mean, I could be completely wrong. I could just die and that's the end. But I feel good, thinking otherwise. It
Yeah.
feels nice. It feels like you're a part of something. So I don't really see the harm in, people just kind of blindly, the majority of us who have not seen a ghost, believing that there is some sort of spiritual matter.
Yeah. What's especially fascinating in this sort of research study that they did is that 41% of Americans believe that ghosts exist, but 43% of Americans believe that demons exist. The number actually spikes a little bit when you start putting this in a different context. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on why you think that might be. Why are we more, and keep in mind, they only 11% of those people actually think they've seen a demon or encountered a demon, but they're they're more faithful regarding demons than they are regarding ghosts. Why is that?
I think it's because of the desire to believe that there's some evil force responsible for some of the things that happen in the world, as opposed to recognizing the evil of human beings, So the idea that a devil figure is responsible for our problems, as opposed to no, this dude's an asshole and he shot up a school,
Right.
Everybody looked the other way. He was an asshole for a very long time.
Yeah, it's Beelzebub didn't get him. That's him. That's been him the whole time, big
he
dog.
always was, And so if spirits come from humans, or if spirits, become humans, I guess, depending on how you look at that process. But ultimately, I can't imagine that they're all good, I don't believe that just because somebody's dead, now, they're on the winning team and they just want everybody to live right. I think that's an ideal outcome for most people. And I think that perhaps that might be the outcome for most people, that they're trying to do something, that you get to go in the good direction when you're done. But I also would suspect that a lot of the people who said they've seen a demon, I would be dying to know the percentage of them that were talking about their ex-spouse.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, I'm seeing a demon. I'll show you a demon. Pull up Facebook.
The bitch live on 3rd Street. Right. Goddamn demon. Yeah, I do think these terms, right, they're so vast when you really break them down, a demon, a ghost, whatever it is, that it has the potential for me to just apply it as I see fit, or to put it on someone or something that may not in fact be that, but in my life, in my very subjective experience, they represented something frustrating or sad or evil, as it were, enough that I was like, that thing is ungodly. That thing is undead, or whatever it is that sort of motivates you calling someone a demon or something demonic.
Yeah, I definitely think, it's good to make the distinction between dead and evil.
Yeah. Yeah, everything that's dead is not evil.
You don't just become the bad guy because you're dead. But it's something you said earlier, there are so many movies, even or Casper, like the dead wants to be still here. And so everything that they're doing is motivated by that. But like, as I would imagine it, and the dead are aware of their circumstances and that they are not, up for renewal. Like that's some movie stuff, where it's like, well, if you do this, that, and the
Right.
third, you can go back and be alive again. So like, they're not trying to come back. They're not trying to take over your body. They're not trying to take over your life, because they can't.
Yeah, and we've had this conversation a few times on the podcast regarding like aliens, right? That there's like this weird instinct on the part of human beings to presume that aliens have human motivations, right? And the same I think applies for spirits. There's no reason that a spirit that has made it past this mortal plane to show back up and be like, still desiring fucking sneakers and,
Right.
and bodega sandwiches
Right.
or whatever it is.
Right, like, oh, I've seen the other side. Now I want to go to the DMV. I know all the mysteries
Yeah.
of the universe. I want to get on the train, sit next to somebody who smells bad.
No, they got better shit to do. I think. I hope.
I hope.
And if they don't, goddamn, that's sad. That's where we stop.
If that's the case, let me come back then.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna come back cool as fuck if this is as good as it is. I think I'll have it all figured out once I die. So the other thing that I think actually might be very helpful in our conversation around like the ancestors and spirituality is the question that sort of kept popping up because there were all these statistics about who believes in ghosts. Republicans apparently believe much more commonly than Democrats. Women tend to believe, in fact, women with 4-year degrees are sort of like the biggest advocates of ghosts existing, I guess, in the country. But then education in almost an opposite direction says that the more educated you are, you tend to believe less, right? There's all these statistics, but the question that kept popping up in my head is, why do we believe in ghosts in the first place? Like, what is the motivation behind that? And one of the main things that seemed to keep popping up was this idea that it is the human mind trying to make sense of things that we can't explain. That like, there's a bunch of shit in the universe that doesn't make sense to us. And the best thing we can do is try to add logic to the unexplained. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is to call it a spirit or a ghost or an ancestor, whatever it is.
Absolutely. I mean, so much of what we say and think is us trying to make sense of our circumstances and the world around us, And again, like,
yeah.
Especially because the way, the bad ghost or the demon idea is used, I think looking for excuses to explain things as opposed to really getting to the core of what happened and who is what, something that a lot of people are just prone to do. And that's, again, not disparaging the presence of spirits, but I think that the reasons that people believe in spirit and in ghosts are not always connected to what I believe, continual spirit presence to be.
Right. That we all sort of find our own motivations, good and bad, for our belief. And some of those motivations are just making patterns. And some of them are like, I am seeking a way to sort of like feel good and feel present in the world. And some of that comes through talking to these ancestors. So one of the things that they talked about in one of the articles I read is this idea of creating logical patterns, right? Like there's this term that they used, paranoia. Is that how you say it? I don't know. I'm not a learned man, but it basically explains that like the human brain has this tendency when we see blurred images or when we hear like weird muffled sounds to want to add human words or images to that to make sense of it. So it sort of explains like why when they have those haunted house shows, right? And they walk through the haunted house and you hear a weird sound and they go, did that ghost just say suck my dick? And then they play it back and you're like, you did say suck my dick. It's because of how easily suggestible our brains are when it comes to creating those rhythms and patterns when it comes to these sounds.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. It made me feel like, in a way, the suggestion of this existence doesn't eliminate the possibility of these sounds coming from a source that we didn't expect them to, but it does tell you that we decide what we can receive from it, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
That, like, if somebody decides to tell me that the ghost is mad at me, I will interpret the ghost as being mad at me. Whereas if I just listen to the sound on my own, maybe I could hear something more peaceful or friendly inside of that ghost noise.
Wow.
All right.
That's deep. I ain't got nothing.
Hell yeah. So the other thing that I thought was really interesting in some of this research was like the idea of people summoning spirits. And I think this connects a little bit to what you were talking about in terms of summoning spirits as a means of coping with trauma, especially like the pain of losing a loved one. And you sort of talked about that earlier with like people writing messages on like Instagram, Facebook, whatever, saying like, we miss you. We've been thinking about you. Remember when this happened, all of that. And that being, while we see that's a public connection that we're seeing, they suggest that some of the reasons that people claim to see a ghost in their home is sort of a more physical, I guess, outpouring of that exact same feeling.
That makes sense, and again, back to the idea of us trying to cope with the set of circumstances around us, it would make sense that as a response to trauma, the way that we're engaging with that idea is oftentimes one that's designed to bring us comfort.
Yeah. And interesting, sort of in a nice way, in terms of the percentage of people who claim to see ghosts, 91% of them, and this surprised me, 91% of the people who said that they had a ghostly encounter said that that encounter had at least one upside to it, such as like a sense of connecting to others. So like they're seeing more often than not, the people who are seeing ghosts are not having a bad time afterwards.
Yeah, and I'd be curious. I wonder how many of those, like, I saw a ghost are literally like, I saw something that looked like a ghost or a figure, or, like I stumbled across a copy of my father's high school yearbook in the middle of the living room. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
like, it felt like he was there or some shit.
Meaning that like you didn't actually see your father, but it was just you saw this picture and you had a feeling as if your father was there because of like the feelings that came up in looking through the book.
Something like that. Or like, maybe feeling like a picture fell off the wall and it was your grandmother trying to tell you something, like that kind of like encounter. I wonder how many of those would be counted among the like, I saw ghost moments.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, it sort of goes nicely back to that idea of like patterns, right? That like, if I am having an emotional day or if I am thinking about a person that I'm missing and then something big enough happens around me or small enough, and that might be enough for me to feel like that was them trying to communicate to me, when in fact, I don't know if it's them trying to communicate to me, but the communication, it maybe doesn't matter. Maybe it's just the feeling. that
Yeah,
it brings it legitimacy.
I think so.
Yeah, it's kind of nice in that way, where this doesn't have to be scary or traumatic if you don't want it to be. And if you do, I don't know, you're a sick fuck. Enjoy yourself. There's also a fair amount of evidence, it seems like, of people blaming ghosts. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. There are lots of people who claim that some of these ghost sightings might be connected to mental illness. Early schizophrenia, unchecked sleep paralysis, overuse of LSD are all things that they're saying essentially can lead a person to feel like they're having a paranormal experience when in fact it's just all in their head.
People hallucinate.
But does that make it real? Does that make it less? Like, where do you think that falls in terms of its legitimacy?
On the hallucination scale, like, it's, I mean, I think the legitimacy will be for them, like, to what ability are they able to reckon or to parse, like, I thought I saw something because I had a bad trip, or because I was off my meds, versus No, I know for a fact that I had this encounter. And that's not to say that people that are, dealing with a psychological emergency or a drug dependency can't have a legitimate encounter too. But, I think we definitely want to be careful between, lining up somebody maybe having a passing moment with a spirit and somebody, thinking that the wall is talking to them because they're on LSD.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, then that would mean that if it feels real to me, it is real. And the justification for that afterwards doesn't, that's a thing that needs to be parsed out personally. It isn't necessarily something for us to decide for them.
Not that it's real, but that it's a valid experience that you had, like during this period of time, you felt like the toaster was talking to you. So like, what kind of lasting impact does that have on you? Do you understand now that it didn't really talk to you? Are you able to use the toaster anymore? Is it like off limits now? We got to get it out the house, I think it's a thing to be dealt with as opposed to like a truth to be accepted.
I got you. Yeah, okay. There's a subjective nature to this, but that doesn't mean that you didn't objectively have an experience.
Right.
The experience is real, even if the byproduct of that experience is something that we should have more conversations about, if nothing else.
Right.
That's fair. There is also sort of like what they call paranormal side effects that happen in our brain. Like, for example, there was this scientist, this dude who basically thought that he, like while working really late at night in a lab, thought that he could hear a ghost or see a ghost moving next to him. And he was a super skeptic, hated the idea of sort of paranormal activity being a real thing. And he decided to sort of like try to dig through to see if he can make sense of what this thing was, and ended up finding out that there was a fan nearby him that was basically spinning at a frequency, something they called the fear frequency, which was like 18.9 hertz, that was spinning at such a slow pattern he couldn't pick it up. The human ear isn't able to pick up stuff below 20 hertz, but it was enough for our brain to start to try to make sense of things, thus creating the illusion of ghostly sounds and ghostly movement. And so he says that may be the justification for a lot of our ghostly experiences, is the stuff around us moving in a way or making noises in a way that aren't perceptible to our human ears and eyes, but are in fact happening in the real world, independent of any spiritual bodies.
You did a lot of research.
I just read stuff and then repeat it back. I don't know. Do you think that the fear frequency in any way bumps against any of your beliefs, the stuff that you've been practicing with your altar and ancestral sort of like prayers and whatnot?
I don't think so, just because fear is just completely devoid, like just not present in that relationship. Like I just don't have any fear around the practice.
I got you. So it doesn't matter. Because I think the fear frequency, even the language around it, does suggest that ghosts or whatever we're seeing, hearing, blah, 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 is scary. And to your point, we shouldn't be, or you're not treating this as a scary thing. So it doesn't really matter.
Right.
That's fair. Okay, this is the last thing that I'll bring up to you before we go to break. The one thing that sort of like really started to ring out to me in terms of this conversation around like all of these illusions of the mind, be it mental illness, be it the fear frequency, all of these things, are the idea that they are in some ways terms and sort of like connotations, I guess, that are created by white people. That white people sort of like create the language and logic around these things. And so our understanding of ghosts, and I think you've spoken to this pretty well so far, it seems like our understanding of ghosts is largely limited to what white people want us to understand ghosts to be in a lot of ways. That it's so long as like the media and the things that we read are connected to fear and to sort of like ghosts being people in fucking, colonial outfits, then we are always going to understand them as like this scary, dangerous thing, and not, as you said, something a little more peaceful or helpful in your life.
Yes. Basically, yes. Like, I don't really even have much to add to that. I just said, like, there's been, I think, in recent years, a movement of people, I say young people in the broadest sense, because I'm still including myself, but, millennials on down, that have been exploring spirituality and who have been tapping into some of the things that people who came before us did. And, I think that we'll continue to hear more about folks doing that, and you'll see more of an influence of this sort of thinking in pop culture with Black folks here and there. And hopefully that'll influence some, a reconsideration of what white folks have told us about ghosts and about our dead.
Yeah. We can reconsider the white stories. We can make this anew if we all build altars in our homes. Is it like in the front of your house, or is this like in a private, quieter spot?
It's in my living room. There's a divider, of a screen. So it's like, it's kind of obscured, and sometimes if I'm going to have people in the house, I don't really want, all eyes on my stuff, I can close it up.
Hell yeah. So you don't have to make this a public experience, but we can all build altars and privately start to break some of these white teachings, as it were.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to take one more break. We'll be back with more Jamilah Lemieux and more My Mama Told Me. And we are back. Yeah, we're back here with more Jamilah Lemieux, more My Mama Told Me. We're still talking about ghosts, the ancestral plane, and breaking white habits, I guess. Breaking our white beliefs out in the world. Let's play a quick game. We have one last game that we love to play on the podcast. This is a new game. It's a brand new game that I cooked up special for this episode. It's called I'm Dreaming of a White Spirit. Of a I'm dreaming of a white spirit. It's a fun game where, Jamilah, I am going to introduce to you a few stories of white celebrities, because I tried to look up Black celebrities who said that they saw ghosts, and truly there were very few who would even talk about it. I think Rihanna at one point had like a quote where she was like, "Oh, I don't eat at that restaurant no more. I get eerie vibes there." But like, that was kind of the extent of it. So there aren't a lot of like ghost stories from famous Black people, but
we know better.
Well, yeah, you can't afford to talk too much in the media about whatever you're experiencing in your home. But there are lots of white celebrities who are like, fuck it, I'll tell you about it. So I just would love to read you some of these stories and get your thoughts on them.
Okay.
Hell yeah. So let's start with a fun one. This is a nice one. Let's start with my boy Matthew McConaughey. Matthew McConaughey in 2009, he shared a story that his home was haunted by a spirit named Madame Blue. He says, "I was not even under the influence and she was there. She wasn't that happy. It didn't seem like she was going to be much fun to hang around or have in my house. So I went ahead and stood my ground. I opened the door and I said, 'You can move around all you want, but I'm not going anywhere.' For weeks, everyone that came to the house said the same thing, that someone's down the hall. There's somebody down in that hall." He says that Madame Blue basically eventually stopped messing with him and eventually let him and his guests just enjoy their home. Your thoughts?
Just like a white man to yell at the ghost. That's his first thought. I'm going to yell at it. I'm going to tell her to stop. I moved into her house. She been here who knows how long. This could have been her land. And here you come. I'm going to yell at her.
If her name is Madame Blue, she's been there a long time.
She's been there a while.
She's definitely, that's her territory. And Matthew McConaughey said, no, I'm not leaving. And apparently Madame Blue gave up.
Maybe she realized he was a decent enough dude, minus the yelling at her part.
Oh, that she was like, I don't know. He's got his shirt off. He seems okay.
Right.
He'll be
Or he
all
might
right.
have just legitimately gotten on her nerves. Like, he seems like he'd be pretty chatty when he smokes. And I could see, like, Madame Blue being like, oh, okay, well, nothing's broken.
Matthew McConaughey has trap you in a corner vibes. You know what I mean?
Very much so.
And as a ghost, you don't want to be trapped in a corner. You got enough going on.
We got enough going on.
So, okay, here's another fun one. Jenna Bush Hager, you know, the daughter of George Bush. She claims that during her time in the White House that she had a number of mysterious spirits sort of interact with her. She said, I heard ghosts. I was asleep. There was a fireplace in my room, and all of a sudden I heard 1920s music coming out. I could feel it. I freaked out and ran into my sister's room. She was like, please go back to sleep. This is ridiculous.
Could have been some of those slaves that built the White House. Could have been some of them dead Iraqis that were like slaughtered because of her daddy's stupid war. Some of the U.S. soldiers that were killed because of her daddy's stupid war. I'm sure there were a lot of spirits that are displeased with the Bush family.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder how many of these unhappy spirits are more in your brain that, like, you know what your daddy did, and maybe that's just living in your spirit, and you are articulating it in an odd way around your home.
That is a way to look at it. I think that's a very good way to look at it.
Okay, here's another one. We'll do two more. This is Demi Lovato. Demi Lovato, they said that they were haunted by a bad spirit. Not by a bad spirit, excuse me, but by a little girl. I think her name is Emily. I've had a medium come over and ghost hunters, and they both told me the same name, Emily. There were so many times that I saw her when I was growing up, Lovato wrote. I believe that everyone can tune into that part of their mind. I think I have a really strong connection to the afterlife. When I walk into the room, I can tell if something has happened there or not, or if a hotel is haunted.
I'll buy it.
Okay.
I'll buy it.
You think Demi Lovato's connected like that?
You know, I hope they're good enough to call two sets of Ghostbusters that like don't communicate with each other. Like, okay, bet the name is Emily. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
But if two different entities that do not know each other, have no prior relationship, both came up with the name Emily, it's kind of hard not to think there's something to that.
Fair enough. Okay, last one. My boy Keanu Reeves said that he's had ghostly experiences. Reeves claims that he saw a ghost as a child living in New York City. I'm probably like 6, 7 years old. He said we'd come from Australia, a nanny in the bedroom. My sister is asleep. She's sitting over there. I'm hanging out. There was a doorway, and all of a sudden this jacket comes waving through the door. This empty jacket. There's no body. There's no legs. It's just there, and then it disappears, he explains. He said, I was a little kid, and I thought, okay, that's interesting. And I looked over at the nanny, and she was making this terrified face. And I'm like, oh, wow. So that was real.
It's possible. You got enough money to have a nanny. Your family probably did some bad stuff. So maybe it's the same as like the Bushes, just on a smaller level. You know, there might be a little.
That these there's bodies buried in the Reeves basement.
Buried in the Reeves basement. So we were just in Australia with our nanny. Like, oh, excuse me, sir, Keanu.
I did like, my favorite part of this is that he doesn't like go like, and then I talked to the nanny and we figured it out together. He's just like, oh yeah, she's tripping, so it must have been real, and then went to sleep. Like, yeah, you don't want to help her feel better, big dog?
I'd still be sitting right in that very spot. That would be the mystery of my life that I had to figure out.
Dog, if a moving jacket seems so much scarier than if it's a person, let's talk. We can work this out. But if it's just a jacket, God, I'm fucked up forever.
That's about as scary can get.
Yep. All right. Well, Jamilah, I think we did it. I think we nailed this episode. Thank you for doing this. Could you tell the people at home where they could find you and what cool shit you have going on?
Yeah, you can find me at JamilahLemieux.com to learn more about my work. I'm on social media at Jamilah Lemieux. Depending on where this airs, I have a story coming out that I'm like terrified of, and people may talk about it. I don't know when you're going to air this, so I can't say what it is. Well, keep up with me on social media. I'm a freelance writer. I've done stuff for the LA Times and Playboy and The Cut. And I've got a big story coming up. And like, I'm waiting for the editor to hit me with like okay, here's when it drops. So it's like, I can't even really promote it. But like, you might remember that you heard me on this podcast when you see the story.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit of a thing.
All right. Well, keep your eyes and ears peeled for that big story and follow Jamilah on all of her shit. And as always, you can follow me at Langston Kerman, and please subscribe, do whatever nonsense you're meant to do to podcasts to make people care about them. And yeah, okay, we did it. Bye.